Think about your own day today, just for a second. Maybe it started with making coffee, getting the kids ready, commuting to work, or maybe diving into a project.
Hmm.
It strikes me that every single one of those things, big or small, involves some kind of give and take, right? A flow of something between you and the world around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this deep dive, we're going to unpack that very idea, the concept of energy exchange.
And when we say energy, we're not just talking about the physical kind, that keeps the lights on or
Yeah.
fuels your car. The material we've been looking at for this deep dive, it's a really thought-provoking chapter exploring professional generalism. It expands that definition quite a bit.
How so?
Well, it also includes what we can think of as immaterial energy, things like your ideas, your emotions, the information you share and receive, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And this is worth paying attention to because understanding how this energy flows and changes can really give you a new way of seeing things. It can shed light on why certain interactions leave you feeling great and others, well, completely drained.
Right. Or what actually motivates us.
Yeah, and even how larger systems, from your workplace to global politics, actually function. Get ready for some potential aha moments as we look at familiar situations through this energy lens.
The chapter we've been immersed in is quite broad,
Yeah.
It explores this concept of energy exchange across different scales, from just two people talking,
Right, like us now.
right up to how nations interact, yeah. It provides a really useful framework for understanding a lot of what goes on around us.
So our aim here is simple. We've taken a close look at this material to bring you the key insights about energy exchange in a way that's clear, engaging, and most importantly, relevant for you, someone who wants to be well-informed without getting, lost in complicated theories.
hmm Let's get into it.
Okay, let's get right to it. When we talk about these two types of energy, what are we really talking about? Material and immaterial.
So the source material makes a clear distinction. Material energy is what we can physically interact with. Resources like food, water, money, the physical effort we put in when we're cooking or working, even tangible things like tools and technology.
Right, the stuff you can touch, use, see.
Okay,
Physical, like the ingredients you buy for a meal or the actual typing when you write a report.
precisely. Now, immaterial energy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit more abstract, but wow, it's incredibly important. This includes things like information, taking it in, sharing it, your opinions, that feeling of satisfaction or frustration.
Ah, the feelings, yeah.
Yeah, your cognitive energy, your knowledge, skills, and your affective energy, which is all about your mood, stress levels. Things like reasoning, persuasion, trust, diplomatic skills, creative ideas, emotions, all that fits here.
So the intangible stuff that really drives our interactions and shakes how we experience the world, like a debate with friends, the know-how to fix something, or the trust that lets businesses cooperate.
And what's really interesting is how these two constantly interact. They're not separate silos. They're always influencing each other.
How do you mean?
Think about it. If you're in a bad mood,
Yeah.
right, that's immaterial energy. It can absolutely cause physical stress in your body. That's material energy.
Oh, definitely. Tension, headaches, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the other way around, too. The act of exercising material energy can significantly boost your mood and cut stress, which is immaterial energy.
It's a constant back and forth, isn't it? Okay, so we see these two kinds of energy playing off each other. But the source materials also says this exchange happens at all different levels. Let's explore that.
Indeed. We can see energy exchange at a very personal level.
Hmm.
Think about a dinner party. You've got the material exchange food, maybe gifts.
Wine.
Wine, yes. And alongside that, the immaterial exchange conversation, opinions, catching up.
Okay.
Work is another great example. You invest physical effort, material, to get a salary, also material, but you're also using mental skills, immaterial, for maybe recognition, which is immaterial.
Mhm.
And how you feel at work, immaterial, can affect your physical health, material.
That makes perfect sense for our own lives. What happens when we zoom out a bit, like commerce?
Okay, commercial trading.
Mm-hmm.
The main thing being exchanged is usually material goods, services, money.
Right.
However, that whole process, it leans heavily on immaterial energy. Things like reasoning, negotiation skills, persuasion, and really fundamental trust between the buyer and seller.
You need that trust. Absolutely.
Then you have something like a live concert. Here it flips. What's primarily being exchanged is immaterial, the music, the visuals, the atmosphere, the shared experience.
Even though it's delivered through material things like guitars and speakers.
Exactly. The focus of the exchange is immaterial.
So the main currency shifts depending on the context. And then if we go even bigger, countries interacting.
Right. At the national or international level, A lot involve sharing material resources, electricity grids, technology aid. And they use immaterial tools like diplomacy and negotiation to make
Yeah.
agreements.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they might also use material energy like military force alongside immaterial strategies like diplomatic pressure or propaganda to gain influence. But ultimately, a key goal, you'd hope, is often to improve the material and immaterial well-being of their citizens.
So it seems like from a simple chat to global politics, this energy exchange idea is fundamental. The source really hammers this home, doesn't it? That you can't avoid it.
That's right. The text is very clear. There is nothing free from energy exchange. It argues everything involves this constant interplay within us and between us and everything else, even things like laws and regulations. They're fundamentally about managing this energy.
Okay, let's dig into that. How are laws a way of managing energy? That sounds interesting.
Well, the source explains that laws, whether they're about stopping theft or, say, preventing bullying, they essentially define the acceptable and unacceptable ways to use and distribute both kinds of energy, material and immaterial.
Give me an example.
Okay, laws against theft. They prevent someone from just taking your material stuff, right? Your
Yeah,
property.
use enough.
Intellectual property laws. They protect immaterial energy ideas, inventions, creative work, and laws against harassment or assault. They aim to protect people's material and immaterial well-being, their physical safety, and their emotional state.
So laws are like the traffic signals for energy flow, setting the rules of the road for how it moves.
That's a good way to put it. And the text makes a really interesting point about what exactly legislation governs. It's subtle.
Go on.
It highlights that while laws might not directly control our thoughts or feelings, how could they? They absolutely regulate how we use material energy. And crucially, this material energy often carries cognitive and emotional information, meaning.
Okay, unpack that a bit. Material energy carries meaning.
Yeah. Think about giving someone a gift. That's material energy, the object itself. But the act communicates care, appreciation, maybe obligation. That's the immaterial energy, the meaning it carries. Laws around how that gift was acquired, or maybe gift taxes, they regulate the material exchange, but they're interacting with that carried meaning.
I see. And it's not just formal laws, is it? The source mentions unwritten rules, too.
Absolutely. Unspoken social norms, expectations, they play a huge role in shaping how we're supposed to use the energy available to us. Think about etiquette or workplace culture. These can be just as powerful as actual laws in guiding how we act and interact.
Okay, so we've got this core idea. Energy exchange, material and immaterial, happening everywhere, managed by rules both written and unwritten. Now, what's the driving force? What makes us engage in this exchange in the first place? Why bother?
This is where the source gets into our basic needs, our desires, and motivation. It introduces some fascinating concepts, starting with the minimum usable energy state, or MUEs.
MUEs.
This is the absolute rock-bottom energy, both material resources like food and shelter, and cognitive ability that someone needs just to survive in their specific environment.
The bare essentials, the baseline for staying alive and, functioning at a minimal level. So thinking about yourself.
Yeah.
What's your MUEs, the absolute necessities?
Exactly. But, as the text points out, we rarely operate just at MUEs. Our actions are also driven by our acceptable usable energy state, AUES, and our desired usable energy state, DUEs.
Okay, AUEs and DUs. Break those down.
AUES is the level we're generally okay with, the standard of living we find acceptable. DUS is the ideal situation, what we're really striving for, our goal.
So AUEs is like, yeah, this is fine, and DUEs is, this is what I really want. And these can be influenced by all sorts of things, right? Personal ambition, sure, but also just keeping up with the people around us.
Absolutely. Social conformity plays a role.
Mm.
The source emphasizes that both AUEs and DEs affect us in two ways. They influence how we feel our effective energy, our mood.
Right. Content or maybe frustrated.
And also what we actively pursue, where we put our cognitive energy, our focus. What's interesting, though, is text notes that feeling dissatisfied with your current energy level doesn't always mean you'll automatically try to get more from others. Yeah, someone might feel they don't have much, but still choose to give some of what they do have to someone they see as worse off.
That really shows the complexity, doesn't it? So why do we usually want more than the bare minimum, more than MUS? Why aren't we content with just surviving?
The text gives a few reasons. Past experiences of scarcity, remembering tough times, can make you want a buffer.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Build a safety net.
Right. Or anticipating future problems, wanting reserves.
Yeah.
Simply seeing others who have more can definitely spark desire. External pressures, too, expectations about consumption or lifestyle, feeling more comfortable and secure with more resources.
Yeah.
And yeah, that human tendency for social comparison, keeping up with the Joneses, it all plays a part.
That all sounds very familiar. The source uses some practical examples for these, doesn't it? Like calories.
Yes. For MUS, he gives the example of the minimum daily calorie intake needed just to keep your body working. Basic functions.
Okay.
AUES might be having enough food readily available each day so you feel energetic and aren't constantly worried about where the next meal is coming from.
A bit of security there.
Exactly. And DUEs could be wanting even more available, maybe to support intense physical training, or just for that feeling of abundance, zero worry about food.
And the job skills example.
Similar idea. MUEs, just enough skill to do the basic tasks and keep your job. AUEs, having a broader skill set, feeling confident, adaptable. DUEs, maybe aiming for deep expertise, specialized knowledge for a big career jump.
Okay, so we have these three states. Minimum, MUEs, acceptable, AUEs, and desired, DUEs. And from these, the source builds out some other concepts, these regions and envelopes. Let's start with the energy state tolerance region, ESTR. What's that?
ESTR is basically the gap between your acceptable state, AUES, and your minimum state,
Yeah.
MUEs. AUES minus MUEs.
Okay, the difference between fine and just scraping by.
Right. Think of it like this. A positive ESTR means you have some breathing room. You could lose some energy, say, have a pay cut or a bad month financially without hitting survival mode. You feel relatively safe from the minimum.
Got it, like having savings.
Exactly. If your ESTR is 0, your minimum is your acceptable level. You're right on the edge. And a negative ESTR, well, that suggests a pretty bad situation where even reaching the minimum feels like a struggle or isn't even seen as acceptable.
That paints a clear picture. What about the energy state upgrade region, or EASE?
ESOR is the gap between your desired state in DUESO and your acceptable state, AUES. DUE is minus AUEs.
So the gap between what you really want and what's just okay.
Precisely. A positive ESOR means there's a drive, a desire to gain more energy, to improve things, to reach that ideal state. If your ESOR is 0, you're basically content with your acceptable level. You're not actively pushing for more right now.
And negative ESOR.
The text points out that doesn't really make practical sense. You wouldn't actively desire less than what you already find acceptable. In that case, your desired state would effectively just become your acceptable state, making ESOR 0.
Makes sense, yeah. You wouldn't aim lower than, okay. And then there's the energy state motivational envelope, ESME. That sounds like it pulls it all together.
It does. ESME is calculated as the difference between your desired state, DUES, and your minimum state, MUS, DUEs minus MUS. It essentially reflects your overall drive, your motivation to improve your energy situation, how far you want to get beyond just basic survival.
So the total distance you want to travel from the minimum to the ideal?
Exactly. A positive ESME means that drive exists. A negative ESME, like a negative ESTR, suggests a dire situation, maybe even despair. And a 0 ESME means no real motivation for anything beyond just getting by.
Now here's something the source highlights that I found really interesting. AUES, that acceptable level, doesn't actually show up in the ESME formula. DUEs minus MUEs. What's the significance of that? Why leave AUES out?
That is interesting, isn't it? The text suggests that maybe your AUES, your acceptable level, is more fluid, like it's a temporary state, something you adjust as you move towards your DUEs, your ultimate desires.
So AUES can shift more easily.
Potentially, yeah. It could be more influenced by your immediate environment, changes in your social circle, new technologies making things easier or harder. Your DUES, though, representing your deeper aspirations, might be relatively more constant, more stable over time.
Can you give an example?
Think about a salary negotiation. You might want $100,000. That's your DUES, your ideal. But based on the current job market or the company's offer, you might accept $80,000. That's your AUES. It's okay for now.
Right. But you probably still want the $100.
Exactly. Your underlying desire, your DUES, likely stays put, even if your acceptable level adjusts. And this gap, DUES minus MUAs, the ESME, the source argues is a major driver behind energy exchange. Why we trade, why we work, why we strive.
And it's not just our own gap, right? Seeing others' gaps matters too.
Yes, comparing our situation, our perceived gap to others can definitely influence our motivation. It might make us rethink our own DUS, either aiming higher or maybe deciding something isn't as important as we thought. That social comparison again.
That feeling of keeping up, or maybe being inspired, or even just reevaluating, the source does mention one important exception to this general drive for more, though.
Yes, it briefly touches on situations involving self-sacrifice. Cases where an individual's Ds, what they desire for themselves, might actually be lower than their MUEs, the minimum needed for their own survival.
Like a first responder running into danger.
Exactly. Prioritizing others' safety, their energy state, above your own minimum needs.
A powerful reminder that it's not always about personal gain. Okay, so we're driven by these gaps in our energy states. How does this translate into what we actually do with our energy? That brings us to willful energizing investment, we and AI, right?
Correct. But first, the source makes an important point. Trying to directly compare the MUEs, the minimum energy needs, of different people is incredibly difficult, maybe impossible.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. People are so different. Physical needs, cognitive abilities, environments are constantly changing. How do you even measure cognitive energy accurately? And material energy itself comes in so many forms, and we all use it differently. It's just too messy for a fair comparison of static levels.
Okay, so comparing who has more or less baseline energy is tricky. So instead,
Instead, the focus shifts to how energy is actually used or exchanged, how we interact.
makes sense. Focus on the action.
The text then draws a quick distinction. It talks about things that are dependent on external energy exchange, like living things.
Us, plants, animals.
Right. We need interaction to survive. Plants need sun, we need food. And then things that are more self-contained, like non-living matter, say, a rock. Conventionally, it doesn't need ongoing exchange just to exist physically, though it can be transformed, obviously.
Okay, so living things depend on exchange. And this dependency leads us to WE&I, willful energizing investment. What exactly is this trying to capture?
We and I is presented as a useful way, a construct, to think about and maybe compare the intentional energy contributions people make. It reflects how much someone deliberately invests their own energy, material or immaterial, to influence the overall energy state of other people or groups.
So it's about the conscious effort, the intention behind the exchange.
Yes, it's not just about what happens passively, but the willful act of investing energy towards others.
Okay, so what we actively do with our energy that affects others. And this impact can be positive or negative.
Exactly. A positive we and I means you're using your energy in a way that's intended to benefit others, to increase their overall energy or well-being. Think mentoring someone or offering help.
And negative E&I.
That signifies intentionally using your energy in a way that harms others, decreasing their energy or well-being, like deliberate sabotage or spreading misinformation.
The source lays out a formula for WE&I, but it looked a bit complex. Can we get the gist without diving into the maths?
Absolutely. Basically, the formula tries to capture two main things. First, how much of your own available energy are you consciously choosing to invest in interacting with others? It's about the deliberate effort.
Okay, the input.
Right. And second, what's the intended outcome of that investment? What change are you aiming to create in the energy of those other people or groups? Is the goal to boost them or bring them down?
So it considers both the effort you put in and the impact you're trying to have on them?
Precisely. It looks at both the intentional contribution and the intended effect on others' energy state.
So We&I helps us look at both how much we chip in deliberately and what we hope happens as a result. What are the advantages of looking at things through this WMEI lens? Why is it useful?
Well, the text points out that it helps us get past just comparing static states who has what right now. Instead, it focuses on the active and intentional use of energy and the intended results.
Not just the accidental fallout.
Exactly. It tries to get closer to the underlying motivation driving the interaction. So We&I offers a potentially more insightful way to understand why people engage in energy exchange the way they do.
Okay, so We&I helps us understand how people use their energy towards others, focusing on intention and intended impact. This leads us nicely into categorizing people based on their E&I as sponsors, antagonists, or exchangers. Let's dive into those roles.
Right. Based on their typical We&I, whether it's positive, negative, or sort of neutral, people can be broadly categorized by whether their actions are primarily intended to benefit others, those are the sponsors,
Positive
or to harm others, the antagonists,
negative E&I.
or neither significantly benefit nor harm, those are the exchangers. And within each of these big categories, there are further distinctions based on reciprocity, on what they expect back.
Okay, let's start with energy sponsors. The helpers, the builders. Positive We&I, what are the different flavors here?
So you have selfless sponsors. They act purely to benefit others, no strings attached, no expectation of getting anything back. Think of an anonymous charity donation or truly altruistic help.
Okay, pure giving.
Then there are reciprocal sponsors. They help, but they do expect some benefit in return, ideally something sort of fair, less than or equal to what they put in. Maybe volunteering for a group that also benefits their own community, or collaborating on a project where everyone gains.
A fair exchange, ideally.
Right. Then selfish sponsors, these are people whose expected return is actually greater than the energy they invest. They're helping, yes, but with a clear eye on profiting significantly from it.
Okay, helping strategically for big gains.
And finally, sacrificial sponsors. These individuals invest a huge amount of their own energy, often at great personal cost, with little or no expectation of return. Think of heroes, people who risk everything for others.
So it really depends on the intention and the expected payback, if any. Now, what about energy antagonists? The ones with negative WNI, aiming to reduce others' energy. Similar breakdown.
Yes, similar logic applies. You have selfless antagonists, kind of a weird concept, but maybe someone who harms others without seeking any personal gain. Perhaps someone acting out of pure nihilism or spite, though that's maybe less common or harder to verify.
Okay. Then reciprocal.
Reciprocal antagonists expect to gain something by harming others. Their benefit comes from the other person's loss. Think of someone stealing credit for work or spreading damaging rumors to get ahead. Their gain is linked to the harm.
Right. Zero-sum thinking, maybe?
Potentially. Selfish antagonists are those where the personal gain they get from harming others is greater than the harm inflicted, perhaps, or maybe just much greater than any effort involved.
And sacrificial antagonists.
These are individuals who invest significant energy, maybe even risk themselves, purely to harm others, with no real expectation of personal benefit beyond the harm itself. The classic villain trope, maybe, driven purely by malice.
It's quite a spectrum. And then we have the middle ground. Energy exchangers. What's their main deal?
Energy exchangers don't have a primary intention to significantly help or hurt others. Their focus is elsewhere. Selfless exchangers are mainly focused on meeting their own basic needs without trying to increase their energy state relative to others. The source uses the example of a baby needing care, but not strategically trying to get ahead.
Okay, just focused on survival needs.
Defensive exchangers engage in temporary exchanges primarily to protect their own energy when they feel threatened or imposed upon, like a child protecting a toy or someone setting boundaries to avoid being exploited. It's about preventing loss, not necessarily gaining or harming.
Self-preservation.
Exactly. And selfish exchangers. Their primary aim is to increase their own energy state, but not necessarily through directly helping or harming others as the main goal, maybe just focusing on their own accumulation.
The source is careful to say these aren't fixed labels, right? People aren't always one thing.
Absolutely crucial point. These are not rigid boxes. People can and do move between these roles depending on the context, the situation, their specific intention at that moment, even who's judging the action.
And just calling someone toxic or a benefactor might miss a lot of that nuance.
Definitely. Those simple labels often just look at the outcome, the impact we feel, without digging into the intention, the time frame, or the bigger picture. A single action doesn't define someone's entire approach to energy exchange. It's more complex.
This leads us into some of those complexities and controversies around these categories. It seems things get murky when one action has mixed results.
Very murky. The same energy investment can absolutely benefit some people while simultaneously harming others. And these effects might play out differently depending on how close people are to the action, the proximal versus the distant environments.
Okay.
So the source introduces this idea of controversially selfless, reciprocal, selfish, and sacrificial sponsors and antagonists. This happens when an action is intended to help Group A, but also knowingly causes harm to Group B.
And the controversial part depends on the expected return for the actor.
Exactly. Let's take controversially selfless sponsor and antagonist.
Give us an example.
Okay, imagine a professional who gives free, expert advice to a friend, sponsoring the friend, knowing that the friend's resulting actions, based on that advice, will likely harm a competitor or another group, acting as an antagonist to them. And the professional expects no personal gain from either the helping or the harming. They're a sponsor to one, an antagonist to another, selflessly.
Wow, yeah, that really highlights the ethical tightrope. And the source also stresses how important scope and time frame are when we try to evaluate WE&I.
Hugely important. If you only look at the immediate effects on the people right next to the action, your assessment could be really biased. You might miss significant harm or benefit happening further away in more distant environments.
Need to zoom out sometimes.
Definitely. And time frame is just as critical. The period you consider, T minus T in the source's notation. A short time frame might give you more confidence in saying action A caused outcome B because it just happened.
Fewer intervening variables.
Right. But you might completely miss the long-term consequences, good or bad.
Can you illustrate that? Long versus short term.
Sure. Think about a teacher giving really tough critical feedback on an essay. Short term. The student might feel bad, lower energy state, maybe feels like the teacher is being antagonistic.
Yeah, feels negative.
But the teacher's intention, their positive we hopefully, is for the student's long-term learning and improvement, a long-term potential benefit. Flip side, someone constantly providing, say, unhealthy but tasty snacks, short term. Pleasure, positive energy boost, seems like sponsorship.
Everyone's happy.
But the long-term health consequences could be significantly negative, making the overall we and I potentially antagonistic over a longer time frame.
So the evaluation can completely change depending on how far out you look.
Exactly. And the source wraps up this section by acknowledging, look, even with these frameworks like we and I to classify intentions and actions, proving direct cause and effect in complex social systems, it's still incredibly difficult.
It's a good reality check. This energy lens is valuable for understanding, but the real world stays messy and resists easy labels. So as we bring this deep dive into energy exchange to a close, what are the main things listeners should take away?
I think the key takeaway is just how powerful this idea of energy exchange, both material and immaterial, can be as a way to analyze things, our personal relationships, work dynamics, even broader societal patterns. It helps us see the constant flow and influence of resources, yes, but also ideas, emotions, trust, things that really shape our reality.
It's a framework for seeing the currents underneath the surface. And thinking about everything we've discussed, maybe a question for our listeners. What's one energy exchange in your own life? Maybe something from today even that you might look at a little differently now through this lens.
Yeah, that's a great reflective question. An interaction at work, a family discussion, a choice about how you spent your time or money.
It could be anything, really.
And the source material actually has a section near the end, energy exchange, key reflections and actions. It kind of prompts you to apply these ideas directly. It might be a useful starting point for someone wanting to, map out the flows in their own world, think about their own MEs, AUEs, Ds, and maybe spot the sponsors and antagonists around them.
Ultimately, this whole exploration gives us a fresh perspective, doesn't it? A framework for understanding connection, motivation, and that constant give and take that defines so much of being alive.
It's definitely a fascinating way to look at things.
We hope it leaves you feeling more informed and maybe with a new lens to view the energy exchanges happening all around you and within you every day.